What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch huge news roundup. Further discussions on the conflicting leaks on both the release date of Overwatch 2, but as well, what product are we actually getting by that time? Are there compromises getting made in order to get the game out quicker? A catch-up of Overwatch 1 news, and as well, some communication from Blizzard on the reworks for certain heroes in 5v5. Flankers, look out. First, Overwatch 1 news, rapid fire. The custom game browser has been updated. So rather than looking at an uncurated list, there's a bit better organization for popular favorites or recent games that you've played, allowing you even to auto-join a specific game you're looking for, which is like a pseudo matchmaking version of it, and as well giving credit to the creators that invented some of these popular modes. Next up, the All-Star skins, which previously were limited time to previous years of Overwatch League around the All-Stars event, are now available for purchase yet again, for a limited time, and I believe until the end of this season. The playoffs start in a week and a half. You'll be able to farm up quite a few tokens by checking out the double elimination bracket, as well as the encore broadcasts, if they're having them for the playoffs. I assume they are. The rumored deathmatch map was officially announced. Malevento has been testing on the PTR, and I'd expect it to come out in the next patch, or sometime soon, TM. Next up, let's discuss the Overwatch 2 release news. It seems like conflicting information. Metro, who's had strong credibility on leaks before, initially came out saying the devs finished the PvE, maps, and cinematics, and the new heroes that are going to be coming to the game a long time ago. And the last thing they have is reworking the heroes for 5v5, and this is a quote, "They are taking way too long." And he even admitted at the time that the Overwatch League would die if they didn't release this PvP update before the next season. That's obvious to everybody. Now, most people don't report those details that Metro said. They take Metro's conclusion, which I didn't buy at the time based on this evidence, where he said that he assumes this means the development of the game will be pushed back another year into 2023, which sent a jolt of energy throughout the community, particularly among the franchise owners in the Overwatch League, who must have put pressure into communications internally. Then a leak from Richard Lewis came out in the Dexerto article that we covered in our previous video on the subject, saying that no, in fact, it's being said internally that the devs are being told to lock in their features, get it fixed, and ship it out, which is some concerning language that I didn't discuss enough in our previous video, but is going to be the centerpiece of today's discussion. Now, I trusted Richard Lewis's article because he's never been wrong on leaks ever. He's not a Twitch streamer, he's an actual journalist. So I had full faith in that. And due to that credibility, I think the Overwatch League felt forced in order to come clean with their plans. And from various reports, heads of the league and team owners, we've got official confirmation that the league will be starting next year in April on what is, quote, an early build of Overwatch 2. In fact, April 22nd likely is going to be launch day, which is a massive announcement. At the very least, slightly before that time, they must have a playable version of the game, at least in closed beta, and likely the earlier the better, because they don't want the pros playing on a game that doesn't work. If you remember, to the Overwatch 1 beta phase, there was a closed beta, then a limited access beta, then an open beta, then full release. And depending on either your luck or Blizzard connections, getting into that was a little difficult. The language of this early build is really nebulous, and no one seems to be very certain on what it fully means. Does all the PvP stuff come along with that early build, or is that a separate thing? And how finished and complete should we expect the Overwatch 2.0 PvP systems to be? It feels to me everyone else I see tries to contrast Metro's leaks to this other information as if it's a binary, either off, on, right, wrong, yes, no, and that's just not the way the world works, folks. Because a lot of the things that I think Metro said are true. So instead, let's use our critical thinking skills in order to meld these two realities. Taking a further look at Metro's replies to this new information, Metro goes to explain that the issue of the early build terminology can mean anything. Pre-alpha, closed alpha, open beta. I think a lot of people forgot that the concept of early access FPS can be a thing, which is concerning for those of us that maybe would have preferred to wait for Blizzard to spend as much time as possible to fully finish the game before releasing it, which I hope is going to be the case, but I think we have a better idea of what actually is going to be released if we trust some of Metro's other information that I stated earlier. Metro goes on to say, we may be getting a really early buggy version of Overwatch 2 and then have to wait another 6 months to a year until the community actually get to play it. If employees are literally being told to finish whatever they have right now to get the game out early, is no one worried about the quality and how it's going to be on release? So I think we're going to have to wait and see the product we actually get by that time to know whether Metro's information on the state of development was correct or incorrect. I've simply got the question to ask, where are the receipts for development on the PvP side of the game? Where is that development? Because if Metro's to be proved wrong and this early build coming out in April, well, then they should be pretty far along in the PvP development, right? He said that the main campaign aspects, right? Let's say the PvE section of the game, the new content, all that's done. It's just a whole ton of balancing and integrating the new concepts isn't done. But that more or less has been confirmed by forum posts, communication about hero reworks that are down the pipeline, as well as just the public communication they've had from BlizzCon Online, where they're like, maybe we'll remove McCree's stun. I don't know. Let's see what we can do. We'll try to balance it. Like, we don't really know how far along they are with that. And it seems like what may happen in reality is that the Overwatch 2.0 that we all want as PvP players might be in development during either the beta phase or sort of a soft launch. And what I mean is, everyone gets really confused about the whole redefining the sequel and stuff. Let's say they have like 10 items they want to get done for Overwatch 2.0, but the main thing people are buying the game for is going to be that PvE, Diablo-esque, Destiny-esque style RPG experience with Overwatch characters. That's what they focused on, clearly, because they don't have evidence of it and Metro's leaks. I don't even need Metro's leaks to make that conclusion. It's obvious based on their communication, as well as, you know, not releasing new heroes for Overwatch 1, not giving us new content, not doing a ranked overhaul, not doing a million things for PvP, right? They abandoned it, clearly. It's not a secret. It's completely plausible to believe that if they have a set deadline where they have to have something playable for the Overwatch League early next year, that what we might get in reality is a bit of a split release or a soft release, rolling out a percentage of the features they want, but updating it over time, stretching that timeline out over the life cycle of the PvP game, which, to be fair to them, isn't a terrible strategy. These types of things feel like doomsday answers when it's under the harsh eye of the internet who over-scrutinize everything. I think their strategy is plausible and is going to affect the biggest impact for the game. It might not be everything I personally want, because I'm a competitive player, I want tournaments, I want a better rank system, I want all those things, but they can use the momentum of interest of launching Overwatch 2 and roll that stuff out over the next year or more. I wouldn't be overly upset with that when we have a bunch of new maps, 5v5, and a handful of heroes to play. I think that's pretty good. So that's what we'll have to wait and see. If the full game is ready early next year, then okay, maybe Metro's rumors, hearing that development's taking longer than expected, were wrong. What do you think? Let us know in the comment section down below. Next subject, we're going to discuss more 5v5 Overwatch 2 gameplay. The new community manager made a series of posts yesterday discussing the gameplay for Overwatch 2 5v5, which sparked some interesting discussion and announced that a handful of heroes are likely to be getting reworked due to the new balance state. Andy B says this: tank players want to understand their new role in a 5v5 world. Andy B talked to the hero design and balance team about this thread and have summed up some thoughts below. Tanks in Overwatch 2 remain both disruptive line breakers and push leading protectors. Changing from 2 tanks to 1 creates a new dynamic where each player, including damage and supports, need to be more careful about the way they position themselves. Flanking potentially becomes more potent as a strategy, and because teams aren't relying on holding the high ground due to the defensive capabilities of multiple tanks, I have major issues with that sentence. I'll get back to that. Maps are being used to their fullest, which has resulted in some fun playtests. Okay, most of that is cool, but asterisks on that high ground not being as effective anymore. No way that's true. Possibly a misquote. He goes on to say, tanks will still be the unquestioned authority on blocking damage. However, they won't be simultaneously contending with the opposing tank blocking nearly all incoming damage for their team, which makes sense. One less tank there's more lanes for damage to get through. Tanks with overwhelming team defensive capabilities like Reinhardt's shield will have their group protections reduced, while their damage and utility will be improved. I mean, this is everything that was explained in the live stream already, so I don't know if I really need to get more in depth into that. And he goes on to say, to address the pressure that a single tank position can put on an individual player, there is an assumption that if the tank dies, the fight is over. Realistically speaking, any player dying in a 5v5 scenario can mean a team fight loss. So everyone's going to have a bit more pressure put on their individual performance. That said, tanks not being responsible for mitigating overwhelming damage for the entire team removes some pressure for the role. This also opens up an avenue for them to focus more on getting in the opposing team's face and pressuring with damage and disrupting enemy lines. In our own playtests, we have observed an interesting dynamic where tanks are not usually the first to die. Support is better able to maintain their front line, creating a scenario where healing is more focused since it's not split trying to keep multiple tanks alive. This point is one that I don't know if I've done a complete explanation of, despite having multiple videos on this subject, but a TLDR answer to this is that when you can cycle with teamwork 2 tanks, it's exponentially more tanking than just one because they have internal synergy, right? The basic, of course, Rein goes in, gets bubble, swings, goes low, shields up, backs up. Zarya steps in front, uses her bubble, gets low, falls back in safety. All the while, when the low HP tank gets into safety, they get healed up. So that cycle is going to be way more than just one tank doing the same thing. However, it's a bit of an easier job from a healer's point of view because you're not having to change targets, at least in terms of keeping the front line alive. So we might expect that front lines can take less space as a concept since you only have one tank to do it. And one of the biggest upsides for the average player that I think doesn't get across in a lot of these communications is that if you have an error in your tank teamwork, you just get blown up immediately because the game is balanced to account for tank teamwork, that if you don't have it, you instantly get blown up. And then if you do have it, it's kind of oppressive. Removing that allows for the rest of the game to be tuned down. Whereas now, we're used to a world where every tank explodes whenever there's a small error of a cooldown not going the right way, as you attempt to play the teamwork game and then it fails. Well, they're just kind of removing that from the game, so you can be more self-sufficient. And he goes on to explain, double barrier team comps is another area directly impacted by the change. In Overwatch 2, there is a maximum of 1 shield tank per team, which leads to changes in how we tune and adjust the total uptime for these barriers. This comes in the form of lowering their health, increasing their cooldowns, or lowering their durations. We want barriers to feel impactful, albeit less oppressive across the game. Tanks rooted in mobility, such as D.Va, Wrecking Ball, and Winston, will see their utility improved, gaining additional defensive stopping power, and in some cases, more freedom to flex between having an offensive impact and being a defensive bulwark for their team. I'd argue a lot of this is already in Overwatch 1. D.Va having more armor health is one example of this, but perhaps it gets more amplified when we get the reworks for Overwatch 2. And he goes on to be somewhat apologetic that they understand it's difficult to communicate because you'll need to play the game in order to get the full conclusion for yourself, and they play it all the time, so there's a bit of a knowledge gap there. They don't mean to sound like they know better than you, but hopefully when we all get to play it, we can more effectively add to these conversations. Okay, so that's a repackaging of some of the concepts we've largely already discussed about the tank's role in 5v5, but what it opened up is a bigger reveal of heroes that should be getting reworked or at least looked at, with the overall game being rebalanced to reward movement and individual play. Because remember, DPS will all move faster. Tanks are more about offense, so getting in to do offense is going to be better. And they've already decided, like, well, maybe a thing like McCree's stun is too strong. So add all those things together, and you can imagine dive meta heroes may come back in a strong way. Andy B responds to a post in saying, this concern regarding mobility creep, as the forum poster calls it, we're paying close attention to in our playtests. So far, we've seen that heroes like Doomfist, Wrecking Ball, and to some degree Tracer will need to be rebalanced, maybe even nerfed, to make sure they're not super overpowered in the new meta. changes like the ones we've discussed in the PvP livestream and here in this thread are incredibly complicated. They have far-reaching ramifications throughout the game. Your question correctly assumes that they can never be evaluated in a vacuum, which means a big percentage of this development, going back to our earlier discussions about a beta and how much content can we assume to get at the soft launch or beta launch or whatever we're getting state of the game early next year, they admit they need data on this. So to further elaborate that point, if say there's 5 new heroes, I think they said there's going to be 6, according to an old IGN article, if I recall correctly. But let's say that completely changes the meta. A whole bunch of things are different. It's really hard to always imagine these things, but let's say they're playing in a world where Doomfist is really good because there's a lot of maps where really tight angles on the cover, lots of cover to get in and out, and more cover means more things to get knocked into. One less tank on the field, so the percentage of squishies is higher, so you're just flinging in and one-shotting all sorts of things. Realistically, to make an evaluation on that, their internal playtests are not going to be enough. That's just a fact of life. With all these new mechanics, it going to 5v5, I think it's probably reasonable that they don't assume that Overwatch 2.0 PvP is a thing they just launch and they're done with. That's why I wouldn't be too upset if it's something that they launch a bunch of new content and then they have to live service it again for quite some time. That's reasonable to me because it's going to take some serious tender loving care in order to get all these things right. I already think we see a lot of these trends in Overwatch 1 as the tanks have been nerfed in their defensive capabilities, where there's so many times where you just need a pressure angle to contest their pressure angle, and if you don't, they're going to overwhelm you and you lose. I think a thing that might be required to happen is that some of the super powered 6v6 kits that we have has to be tuned down. And to Blizzard's defense, in many ways they have. Like, the game's really been nerfed down to a way that I find satisfying because it makes the game the most balanced we've ever seen. Something I never thought they would actually either do or be able to do. I think in a 5v5 world where there's less options for tanks to counter things, so it doesn't just turn into a one-shot fest or a full flank fest, you can't really have so many easy insta-kills, which is something that I'm not a huge fan of current Overwatch 1, despite liking it on the whole. There's tons of easy insta-kills, which feels pretty fun to me personally in Overwatch 1, where the game's mostly about setting up your pressure and maximizing it to get picks, losing that texture of one tank, as well as making maps that are much more suited to that style of play, might take that a little too far. I think it stands to reason that some of the high damage or high mobility kits will have to be reduced to scale down to the single tank, or else Overwatch 2 will just full out feel like a shooter game. Whereas right now, Overwatch 1 feels much more like a hero shooter to me, where the abilities are of equal strength to the FPS lethality, because they confirm half of the kills, let's say. One last point from Andy B. Are playtests taking into account new heroes as well? He says, without going into detail, yes. Which I think is an important point that some people might have been confused about. When we get an early build of the game, and when I say we, I don't know who's getting it, when someone gets it early next year, either if it's just the pros, closed beta, open beta, who knows, it is with all the new content, which I think opens an interesting point that they don't really want to linger in the 2-game philosophy for too long. Because realistically, when we see people playing Overwatch 2, we already know Overwatch 1's basically done, and we all just want to play the new thing. So hopefully that beta period doesn't take too long, and it's more along the assumptions I'm making, where it's more of a soft launch for the PvP side, with a plan to develop it further over the year. One last thing before I go, if you're currently playing Overwatch 1, I wanted to quickly update my tier list from a previous video to account for a surprising development, which might gain you some SR. I was skeptical on putting Soldier number 1, so it kind of skewed some of my other picks being uncertain on it, but I think given enough time, I might even put Soldier in S. Due to how strong he is, a lot of other characters are a lot worse than I thought if you're playing up against him a lot. So because of that, in the tier list, I moved a few key heroes down and a couple up. I moved Pharah down a little bit, but dropped Genji and Echo down a tier because I think they are just terrible against Soldier. Brig as well, against some of these heavy poke comps, struggles to really do much. And similar to what I said about McCree, like, these stun type characters are power balanced just for their stuns. So if they're engaging into you, giving you easy stuns, great, stun lock them and win for free. But really think poking is the way to go with the current Overwatch patch. Characters like Echo and Genji kind of need a poke phase in order to be effective, and Soldier's damage marks them so easily at range, they're way worse than I thought. Be careful for that. I moved up characters like Ana out of B tier into lower A, and as well Doomfist closer to some of these other B tier counterpick type characters because he can punish Soldier. Otherwise, I more or less liked the rest of the tier list as I had it. So the general theme of this is you either need a character that pokes among the best or hard commits. And if you ever get stuck getting poked down by Soldier with his 30 bullets of really easy to hit shots doing 20 damage to you, your character's like useless. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out. Let's know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, click subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.